My name is David, and this happened to me not too long ago. I've been married to Emily for 3 years. She works in a bank, and I am a simple engineer in a factory. We live in a small one-bedroom apartment that my parents helped us buy. At first glance, we have everything: a job, a house, a family. But lately, Emily and I have been feeling out of sorts. Maybe life has just hit a dead end. Maybe we're just bored with each other. The routine of everyday life has settled in, and neither of us wants to change it. There are no more spontaneous dates and surprises, just the repetition of work, dinners, sleep, and repetition again. Sometimes I wonder if we remember why we got married in the first place. The love we once had seems to be slipping away, and I don't know how to get it back. One Saturday, Emily says to me, "David, I'm going to meet the girls and spend the evening at a coffee shop. You don't mind, do you?" Of course I didn't mind. I thought it was great. We could relax, have a beer, and watch TV. I said goodbye to her, sat down in front of the TV, opened the bottle, and was just getting comfortable when the doorbell rang. I thought, who could it be? I opened the door, and there stood my mother-in-law, Susan. She asked if Emily was home. I explained that she had gone out with some friends. Susan sighed heavily and asked if she could sit with me for a while. What could I say to that? Susan is in her 50s, but she takes very good care of herself. Sometimes I catch myself noticing how attractive she looks. It's something I'll never admit to anyone, not even myself, but it's there, a strange fascination with her. I put the kettle on and we sat down at the table. She folded her hands in her lap and was silent. I looked closer and noticed that her eyes were moist. I asked her what was wrong. She burst into tears and told me that her husband, William, Emily's father, had gone on a trip with a young coworker. Susan happened to see his messages on her phone. She confronted him, and instead of apologizing, he yelled at her. That's when she left the house and didn't know where to put herself. I could see the pain in her eyes, the betrayal she felt. It was as if her whole world had crumbled, and she didn't know how to put it back together. I listened, not knowing what to say. It was a family matter, my wife's parents, but I saw someone who needed support. I rummaged through my pockets and found a bottle of cognac we had left over from the holidays. I poured her a shot. Susan smiled tearfully, took a sip, and began to talk about how she and William had met, how Emily had grown up, how difficult the 90s had been, and how William had eventually lost interest in her. She talked about the little things, how he brought her flowers just for fun, how he amused her, how they danced in the living room to their favorite songs, how he hugged her when she felt bad, and then it all slowly faded away. It was heartbreaking, and I felt sad for her. I started complimenting her, telling her that William didn't appreciate her, and she drew closer and closer to me. I don't know how long we sat like that, maybe an hour, maybe two. The brandy had taken its effect on me, and the apartment felt hot. Susan had taken off her blouse, leaving her in a light t-shirt. I looked at her and realized I couldn't take my eyes off her neck, her shoulders, her breasts. Then she asked, "David, do you think I'm beautiful?" I nodded, feeling mesmerized. She moved even closer, whispered something, and kissed my forehead. Her lips were hot, her skin silky under my hands, and for a moment we were both free. We forgot about everything, about Emily, about William, about being a family. It was surreal, like a dream I couldn't wake up from. Her hands were on me, her breath was warm on my skin, and all the emotions that had been building up inside of me came rushing out. I couldn't think clearly. It was as if all the frustrations, the loneliness, the desire for something different, something exciting had taken over. We moved to the couch, and the rest of the world was plunged into darkness. It was just Susan and me, and nothing else mattered. After about an hour, we were lying on the couch looking at each other, not knowing what to say. Susan spoke first. We shouldn't have done that. I was terribly embarrassed, but some part of me couldn't forget what had just happened. It was wrong, but at the same time I felt alive, like a spark I hadn't felt in a very long time. Susan left in a cab, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the couch that needed to be moved urgently before Emily arrived. After that night, Susan and I hardly spoke, but we exchanged glances that made my insides ache. Every time we gathered as a family, I got goosebumps. Susan would sit next to William, smiling, talking, and I couldn't shake the memory of that night, and wondered what would happen if she remembered it too. Sometimes I could see it in her eyes, a flicker of something, a memory, maybe regret, maybe something else entirely. It was like an unspoken secret that hung between us, invisible to the rest of us, but that we couldn't ignore. There were times when I thought about calling her, just to hear her voice, just to see if she was okay. But I knew that would be a mistake. I knew that what had happened between us should never happen again. And yet, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Every time Emily mentioned her parents, every time we made plans to visit them, my heart started racing. I didn't know what I was more afraid of, that Susan would want to talk about that night, or that she wouldn't. One night, Emily suggested we take her parents out to dinner. I felt my stomach cramp, but forced myself to smile. Sure, I said, trying to sound casual. The thought of Susan coming back to our apartment and sitting at the same table where it had all started made me dizzy. When they arrived, William was cheerful as usual, oblivious to the tension simmering beneath the surface. Susan greeted me with a polite smile, but there was something unsure, questioning in her eyes. As we sat down to dinner, I couldn't resist casting a glance at her. Every movement of her hand, every laugh she made reminded me of what we had done. When the evening finally ended and they left, I felt a strange mixture of relief and longing. I watched Susan walk away, intertwining her hand with William's, and wondered if she felt the same pull I did. The guilt was eating me alive, but so was the memory of how alive I felt that night. It was like I'd tasted something forbidden, something arousing, and now I couldn't go back to the way it was. I loved Emily, I really did, but something was missing, something I'd gained, however briefly, with Susan. Every time we gathered as a family, goosebumps ran down my spine. Susan would sit down next to William, smile and say something, and I couldn't shake the memory of that night. She was always there, lurking in the back of my mind, constantly reminding me of what we had done, of the line we had crossed. I'd often wondered what would happen if Susan decided to bring it up. Would she want to talk about it, or worse, would she want to do it again? The thought terrified me, but at the same time excited me in a way I couldn't explain. The tension between us was like a time bomb, and I had no idea when it would explode. I knew I had to make a decision. Either let go of what had happened and move on with my life, or face it head on. But all I could do now was wait, caught between the past and the present, between Emily's loyalty and the forbidden bond I had with Susan.